So, Minister Zafrul, I'm going to come to you first. Thanks again so much for joining us. I know you're busy traveling around the world. You're negotiating with the Trump administration. You've just been in Saudi Arabia. How difficult is the economic outlook at the moment from Malaysia's perspective?
Well, first of all, thank you, Ben. Thank you again, and the rest of my fellow panelists. Yeah, you're right. Just came back from Riyadh, and before that, I was in the APEC meeting in Jeju in Korea for the minister responsible for trade. For Malaysia, we are very much an open economy. As you know, we look at our trade to GDP, it's about 180%. And obviously, the Liberation Day will impact Malaysia's GDP growth. For 2025, we are projected to grow in terms of GDP between 4.5 to 5.5%. That's before the announcement by Trump administration and by Trump on the reciprocal tariff. So now we are reviewing that. We're still waiting for more information. We're doing some sensitivity analysis. At the same time, as you said, Ben, I'm also leading the delegation in terms of negotiations with the Trump administration. So we're waiting for that. We have a 90-day pause for now. But definitely, if you ask the analysts, you can see that they have revised the projection for Malaysia's GDP by about 100 basis points. And for us, for the government, the central bank and the Ministry of Finance is reviewing our GDP forecast, and it's definitely going to be revised downwards given the uncertainties and the impact and the possible impact of the reciprocal tariffs.
What's your sense, just looking a bit more broadly, like where is this coming from? Do you think this broader shift towards protectionism is just about President Trump, or is there something deeper either in America or in kind of the world economy and our societies that's driving this broader shift?
Well, in your opening just now, Ben, you said this is not something new, and I somewhat agree with you. And you've seen that even during Trump 1.0. And if you look at global FDI, it has been declining since. But for ASEAN, it has bucked the trend, and ASEAN FDI has gone up. And why is that? I think one of the reasons is companies have already started to realign their supply chain. When they redesign their supply chain according to the geopolitics, the geoeconomic circumstances that they face, right? Malaysia and ASEAN, if you look at ASEAN centrality and ASEAN neutrality, it's in a good spot where companies can then realign their supply chain to the region. And we've seen the global FDI going down, but FDI into ASEAN going up. And you've heard about this China plus one, Taiwan plus one, everybody plus one, and somewhat Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, of course, Singapore have all been net beneficiary of this. So you're right, it's not new, but whether it is here to stay, I think, well, your guess is as good as mine, Ben. But of course, Malaysia, as I mentioned to you before this meeting, I just called for ASEAN Economic Ministers meeting before this call, where I chaired 3 meetings, one with the Chinese counterpart, the Minister of Commerce of China, and then after that, the Minister of Economic Trade and Industry of Japan, and then after that, Minister of Trade for both Australia and New Zealand. And all of us in that call, again, reiterated our position in supporting rules-based multilateral trading system with WTO at its core.
From the perspective, Minister, of Malaysian companies, what do they see the core challenges as being right now? Obviously, as you said, Malaysia's a really globally integrated sort of manufacturing center. You have, biggest trading partner is China, but you have a lot of major US investors in Malaysia making semiconductors and many other electronic products. So you talk to manufacturers, other companies all the time. What are they worried about? Is it the tariff rate that you settle on with the US? Is it sort of US-China tensions? Is it the broader environment? What are the core sort of issues they're coming to you to try and solve right now?
If you look at Malaysia, and when I talk to the companies, well, obviously I talk to the companies that are exporting to the United States. What are their main concerns? Number one concern will be the uncertainty. You mentioned about that, and they said that it's very hard to plan investment, plan exports, plan everything, right? And therefore, that is the number one concern. Of course, at the same time, they want us to engage the United States because if you look at United States and Malaysia, we have a very strong trade relationship. Uh, China is our largest trading partner, but US is our largest export market. So Malaysia export the largest export market is the United States, not China. Similarly, for investment, the largest investor in Malaysia is the United States, not China, right? So US is a very important partner to Malaysia. And if you look at the exports to the United States, you mentioned, Ben, semiconductor. Yeah, 60% of our export to the United States is E&E and semiconductor, right? And out of that 60%, 65% comes from US multinationals based in Malaysia. So therefore, of course, those multinationals that are based in Malaysia are supported by Malaysian companies. The ecosystem being built over the last 60 years enables Malaysian companies to also participate in that supply chain. So they will also be affected. So the Malaysian companies, for example, one multinational, let's say Intel or AMD or any other big multinational, there will usually be 300 to 400 local companies supporting that multinational. So they are, of course, also worried. So when we talk to the United States, we must also understand what are their concerns. And I think one of my fellow panelists here talked about their concerns about their supply chain, whether because when you talk about tariffs, it's also about talking about trade imbalance, also talking about economic security, right? They want to know, whether the technology that is being exported, the technology that are secure in terms of the rights towards the technology. But so those are the concerns about the companies. They are very uncertain and about the markets, and at the same time, they want us to engage the United States. And given that most of those companies exporting to the United States are American companies, they themselves have offices in Washington, that they also are engaging Washington on this. But the other point that you mentioned correctly just now, I think one of my fellow panelists talked about the fact that we export intermediate goods. So that is true. A lot of the American companies exporting to the US are exporting the semiconductor are basically intermediate goods, where the finished goods are actually produced mainly in the United States. So again, this is important in terms of supply chain resiliency and supply chain security.
And I mean, I think there's a broader question here for countries like Malaysia, and I think many others in the region, that you've thrived by being this bridge between kind of the US as an ultimate source of final demand, also a source of investment and technology, and China as a source of sort of manufacturing capacity and increasingly, to a certain extent, demand as well. But in the good times, when relationships between Beijing and Washington were positive, that was a great place to be. But we know that this US-China competition is not just about Trump. It predates Trump, and it obviously continued through the Biden administration, and it's being driven on the Chinese side as well. So how secure do you think countries like Malaysia can feel in the model you have, thinking about the next, not just the next 4 years, but the next 10, 20 years ahead? Do you think you are going to come under pressure to sort of make choices about who you side with economically? And do you think that you'll need a different model that isn't so reliant on both the US and China going forward?
Ben, I think it's a combination of both. We have already understood the concern of both. In the last 5 years, we have started to diversify to mitigate that risk. We can't eliminate that risk. We can't eliminate the impact. And you can see that even today, as we mitigate that risk through accessing new markets. That's why we are in the midst of concluding Malaysia-EU FTA. We just concluded Malaysia UAE FTA. We're going to announce the Malaysia GCC FTA next week. And we've seen the total trade to Malaysia and US is around 11%, right? And Malaysia trade with China is about 12%. So both is less than a quarter of our total trade with the rest of the world. And that number is declining, right? Despite the absolute term going up. So it shows that our diversification strategy is working. We also are requested to be members of other blocks, economic blocks. I think you know which blocks we're talking about. We're talking about BRICS. We signed, 17 FTAs, both bilateral and multilateral, including the CPTPP, RCEP, etc. So that is definitely something that we will continue to do and supporting our companies as well to get that market access through our relationship with the other countries and other economic blocks. But one must not forget ASEAN itself. I think Malaysia to this year chair ASEAN. Even trade within ASEAN is less than 25%. It's at today intra-trade within ASEAN member states is around 23%. That shows the opportunity to increase that. So yes, we need to do more with other countries, and we need to do more with our neighbors as well. When we look at other issues regarding trade, definitely there are concerns. One cannot deny the fact that sometimes people assume that Malaysia or Singapore or any third country will have to make a choice between United States and China. But let me say this, in my negotiations with the US, there's never been one case where US said you have to choose, right? But we know, we understand the concern is more on the supply chain and on economic security. So we need to ensure that technology safeguards are in place. Maybe there are issues about supply chain and not ensuring that supply chain is secure, right? Especially in technology or in areas like pharmaceuticals.
Minister Zafrul, given these kind of challenges for global trade, which, yeah, as we've all discussed, aren't unique to Trump. I mean, does a country like Malaysia need to think about a different model going forward that's maybe less dependent on global trade? If the barriers are going up, around the world, then maybe being this sort of connected global trading manufacturing base isn't going to be the most sustainable model. So is this sort of trend also going to drive a place like Malaysia to rethink your economy in the next few years and think about what you can do differently, not just negotiate better deals, but thinking about a whole different structure that's less dependent on export-led manufacturing?
For Malaysia, we can't afford to think that way. If you look at the size of our economy, we are not China, we are not US, we're not India even. We are a population of 34 million people. Even if you look at ASEAN as a whole, with 10 ASEAN member states, the entire ASEAN GDP is only 3.8 trillion US dollars, right? So there's no way that we can change the model in such a way that we become self-reliant on all major critical needs of Malaysia, right? That's something that I think is not sustainable. At the end of the day, I believe, and I'm sure my colleagues in ASEAN believe that we need to support the rule-based multilateral trading system. The principle of multilateralism is here to stay for us, right? And that's why we talk about global south. We talk about other, worst case scenario. Like I said, the world trade with the US is less than 15%. There's still 85% of trade out there. We need to relook. We need to transform what we have today. It's not perfect, but to change and overhaul in such a way that the principles of multilateralism no longer relevant. WTO, there are weaknesses, no doubt about that. So let's look at ways to improve to make sure that WTO continues to be relevant. And I discussed this with the DG of WTO a week ago. I had a meeting with her. We both acknowledged the shortcomings. We've seen what happened in MC13 in Abu Dhabi, and now MC14 in Cameroon, where again, we need to resolve issues. And of course, we know the dispute settlement mechanism doesn't work with the appellate body being what it is today. But these are things which we need. We need to fix things rather than, destroy what we've achieved so far. I mean, ASEAN is growing today at 4 to 5%, because at the end of the day, because we are living in an area or in a block where there is peace and prosperity, right?
Minister Zafrul, I want to come back to you on sort of the ASEAN question, which you mentioned earlier, that interregional trade is around a quarter, but I think it's been at that level for some time. You have an ASEAN summit coming up this weekend. I mean, meaningfully and practically, what can ASEAN do, as a response to what's happening to try and boost internal trade and to try and support fairer trade or rules-based trade that works in your interest? Practically, as the chair of ASEAN this year, what can Malaysia do and what can ASEAN do?
Just to pick up on what David talked about on the need for China to import more from countries like ASEAN. One of the things we're doing, in fact, today during our ASEAN meeting, economic ministers meeting with our counterpart, Mr. Wang Wentao, who's the Minister of Commerce for China, we all agreed that we will conclude, and in fact, we just concluded at the chief negotiators level, at the working level, on the upgrade of the ASEAN FTA with China. Right, we have today the version 2.0, so it's upgraded to version 3.0. That we hope will increase ASEAN's exports to China. But for intra-trade with ASEAN, what is happening today, I mentioned the GDP size of ASEAN is $3.8 trillion US, and we look at the population of ASEAN today, it's close to 680 million people, of which we look at the number of those who are under the age of 30 is 50% of that 680 million people. So it's growing. But if you look at the companies, they are mainly SMEs and micro SMEs. So to encourage them to trade outside their domestic comfort zone, you require support, capacity building, etc. But e-commerce is one area where we feel that it will help for trade to be more inclusive. So we are at the final stage, and we hope by October, when the leaders meet again, we can conclude the Digital Economic Framework Agreement. We call it DEFA, which is first of its kind for an economic bloc, where we will increase the participation of many companies in the intra-trade within ASEAN, where we have the rules, the guidelines, and also the payment system, etc., to encourage more companies to trade. And this, we hope, will increase intra-trade within ASEAN, because many of companies within ASEAN are SMEs and micro SMEs.
I mean, in addition to ASEAN, Malaysia is also in the CPTPP, this Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement, which the US sort of was originally pushing and then belatedly pulled out of. The UK joined as well. I mean, do you think in terms of scaling up these efforts to support the trading system that you should be looking to expand CPTPP or at least deepen cooperation with other big trading blocs like the EU? I know that the Singapore Prime Minister and New Zealand Prime Minister, who are both CPTPP members, recently discussed with the EU ways to coordinate on global trade. So yeah, do you see the potential for doing more? I mean, not just as ASEAN, but as a member of CPTPP, to combine or work together with the EU and other blocs to try and get some scale in these efforts?
Yeah, definitely. In fact, today we discussed that. And as you know, UK is now also a member of CPTPP, and now UK has got an agreement with the EU as well. Not sure what happened to Brexit. But like it or not, what's happening today has actually accelerated some of that discussions. EU and CPTPP, ASEAN and CPTPP, because many ASEAN members were also CPTPP members. Also RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, RCEP, comprised of ASEAN plus China plus Korea plus Japan, Australia and New Zealand. So how do we increase membership of that? CPTPP itself also increasing membership with many new countries, new applicants, and we just approved one, Costa Rica now, going through the process. So we all are looking at using the current multilateral platform or multilateral agreement that we have on trade, bringing new members in, and at the same time getting one economic bloc to talk to another economic bloc. And that's happening at a much faster pace than ever before.
And Minister Zafrul, for Malaysia, economically, does a sort of Asia for the Asians model? I mean, I know some of your former leaders in the past, like Mahathir, have talked about this too. Is that appealing for Malaysia, kind of economic spheres of influence, regional development, regional growth rather than global?
I think it has to be both. Mahathir last time looked at the Look East policy, right? And we add China to the Look East policy. But, we're talking about today, in fact, yesterday, our Prime Minister, Anwar Ibrahim, talked about the Global South, right, working together. So it's about countries at a different stage of development, a different stage of growth, working together. I think we discussed this earlier about developing countries as well. So it's about, understanding where everyone stands at that particular cycle of growth. You look at the GDP per capita, you look at GNI per capita, where are we today? And so we all face the same challenges in a way, but at the same time, we also need each other. So to me, it's again, I don't believe in Asia for Asia. We all live on the same planet.
And another question for you, Minister Zafrul, from online, from Francisco Perez Gonzalez, who's asked, in particular, what role is there for the WTO? I mean, you mentioned some of the limitations to the appeals process. So what can the WTO do and its members right now at the moment to support the system in practical terms?
I think, Ben, I need another 2 hours to explain.
We've got about 5 or 6 minutes, but yeah, hopefully quicker than that.
Yes, of course. I mean, I'll give you a very brief answer. We have seen, to be fair, America or United States is still a member of WTO, right? That's positive, right? In the dialogue, even APEC that we just had a week ago in Jeju in Korea, United States still a member of APEC, and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer turned up at the meeting. So everyone is still there. That means everyone still believes that WTO or multilateral platform like WTO still has a role to play. It's just like, what is that role and how effective is that role today? And can that role be made relevant to the global architecture or global economic architecture today? So I think if we make it relevant and we get everyone to agree, I mean, and I will not name countries here, but United States is not the only country that always have something to say when we discuss about new ideas or new proposals on WTO.
I wonder, what you're both saying, what everyone's saying actually sounds suspiciously like the US is still the indispensable nation. And so if that's correct, then I'd be interested in your thoughts on an alternative interpretation then that the US is withdrawing and becoming, or maybe becoming, a regional sphere of influence, Dunroe Doctrine kind of thing. And so that would be that 80 years ago, it sort of made sense for the US as a very large, very rich economy and very secure to offer security guarantees to the rest of the world, to much of the rest of the world, and access to its domestic market in exchange for alliances. Now that no longer makes sense because the US is not so much larger. In fact, in terms of manufacturing that wins wars, it's much smaller than China in particular. So actually what's going on is a kind of unilateral rewriting of that grand bargain. And what it consists of is, I'll give you security guarantees, you give me access to your markets, and you give me investment in mine. And that's a deal that you can strike with China, maybe not, but with Japan, probably yes, maybe with Europe, maybe with the Middle East, India, probably not. Or, there's some sort of deal that you can work out with several of these countries, but not China, right? So therefore, that's the world that's on offer now. And if the US is still the indispensable nation, then ultimately other countries are going to sign up to that deal other than China. What do you think of that proposition?
Minister, did you want to come in there?
Well, again, for Malaysia and for ASEAN, we have always stated that no one is indispensable, and therefore we are going to be friends with all. But definitely, US would like it or not. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not sure what the latest figures are, but I believe it's about 25% of global GDP, United States, right? Around there. I don't know. I think maybe David and Eugene, know better. It's a quarter of GDP. So in that sense, if you look at the size of the US economy, obviously, everyone wants to engage the US, right? But at the same time, there will be limits. In democracies like Malaysia and many other countries, we are also answerable to our constituents, right? I will not be sitting here if I agree to everything the United States want. I'll be kicked out in the next general election. And we've seen the impact on elections in 3 countries, right? We've seen the impact in election in Canada, in Australia, even in Singapore, right? So there will be a point where any countries, be it US or China, just like Malaysia or even the UK or EU, we will have to put the interest of our country first, the interest of our people first, right? So there, I think it's not as straightforward as it may seem.